Hello YouTube and welcome to a new video. I am so lucky to be able to show you this third game that I've got in store for you. It's really a great game played by Caruana and Magnus Carlsen. It was played in 2014 April in the Gashmov Memorial, and 1 month after this game was played, Magnus Carlsen reached the highest ELO rating ever to be achieved in the chess history. He reached 2,882, and as you can see here, his rating now is 2,881, or was back then. So he gained 1 ELO point from April to May. That's pretty insane. Like, do you guys think that anyone will ever beat that score? I don't know. I hope it will happen, and I hope Carlsen as well will get up there again. But right now, we're going to dive right back into this this game. All right. So Fabiano Caruana plays e4, Carlsen plays e5, knight to f3, and knight to c6. And after bishop b5, knight f6, we have a Berlin defense from black. And it is looked upon as a drawish but very solid position to play on with. We have castles. Knight captures e4, d4, knight d6, bishop captures c6, d captures c6, d captures e5, knight f5, queen takes d8, king captures d8, and h3. All these moves are theoretical and very good moves from both players. And this is kind of the main move order for both black and white in the Berlin. But the move h3 chosen by Caruana here is actually not as common as knight to c3. At least that's what my database shows. And it's also less chance for black to win after move h3, so that may be why Fabiano chose h3 instead of knight to c3, simply because black has less winning chances after this h3 move instead of knight to c3. That's a statistical point of view, at least. Alright, so after Carlsen plays h6, here the move king e8 is preferred instead of that move from the vast majority of games. And after h6, it is even less chance for black to win. Other moves would be, instead of king e8, maybe getting a bishop to d7 immediately, or even bishop to e7. Both good moves. Even h5 actually. But h6 is recommended by my database, of course. So here, Caruana plays rook to d1. And it's not as common as knight to c3, but he gets the rook on an active square. And he kind of asks this black king where he wants to go. So there are two alternatives here for black. King to e8, which Magnus Carlsen played, or he could play bishop to d7. And if you play bishop to d7, the idea is simply after moves as knight to c3, king to c8, bishop f4, for instance, and b6, getting your king over to the queen side so that you really have a secure position for your black king there. And it's really hard for white to break down that wall of pawns in front of the king here on b7. And both the rooks will become quite active. But Carlsen didn't go for that. He went for king to e8 and knight to c3, bishop to d7. So having your king on e8 after bishop d7, it is a good idea because you want your rook to d8, but still it feels a bit passive with bishop to d7 right now. But I think it is still very, very solid. My database suggests bishop d7 and bishop to e7 as main moves. So I think it's good. Now bishop f4 by Caruana, rook to d8, knight to e4 and bishop to e7. So a downside of the Berlin is that you kind of give away this light squared bishop for this knight on c6 early on for white. And what happens is that you give away your bishop here, but you get really great activity with your pieces for that knight or for that bishop that you trade off for the knight. So these bishops are really, really badly placed at the moment, but if Carlsen could ever play b6 and c5, this bishop would become really, really strong, and there's no light squared bishop for white to ever contest this bishop. But I think Carlsen plays a normal move here, which is after g4, knight to h4. At least he tries to trade away the knights here, so that he gets his bishop into more active position, and also trying to get his king out to e7, bring his rook over probably, and just trying to have a better position. Although it is not given that anyone stands much better in this particular position. After takes and king to g2, the computer suggests that this is plus 0.2, sorry. But I don't really think that those small points really is any serious weakness or greatness for any player. I think black is still so solid here. But alright, bishop to e6, f3, b6. So maybe opting for the c5 pawn push that I mentioned earlier. Now b3, trying to get this bishop a bit more passive by playing this b3 move, so that you can't really get your bishop onto the c4 square here. But Magnus still plays c5 and Caruana plays c4, even furthering the immobility for this bishop. Rook to d7, and here I think Caruana could just take, and after bishop or king takes, just bring your other rook inside to the d file. But Caruana didn't do that immediately. He played bishop to g3 first, trying to trade off one of the bishops so that this knight becomes so much more powerful than this bishop. Than this bishop on e6, because this bishop has nothing to play for in this position because of these pawns right here and these pawns right here on light squares. This knight can move freely on dark squares. So that's not something Magnus Carlsen really wants to do, so he goes all the way back to e7. Now, imagine yourselves where you want your pieces to be at for white. Now, take a good look at this white position. And which piece out of these 4 would you like to have at another square? And if so, where would you like it to be? And of course, when I ask this question, obviously you have to say that, yeah, you want to get your pieces more active. And I can say immediately that the rook on a1 is not a part of that. The rook on a1 can always get to d1. And the rook on d1 is really great where it's at. But probably you want to trade off. And that's what Caruana did. And after takes, you can play this move, or you can play something else. And this is what I wanted you to see. So getting your knight down to c3 and up to d5. d5, that is a really strong outpost for this knight. This knight has so much power where it's at d5. And if an eventual c6, then Caruana will be even more happy because black restricts this bishop even more. So that's what Caruana hopes for and tries to aim for right now. So after knight to c3, king to d8, knight to d5, and rook to e8. Caruana plays rook to d1, and Magnus plays king to c8. And that is actually a mistake. Carlsen made a big mistake by placing his king to c8. And the reason for that may shock you at first, but try to find Caruana's best move here. So the move is knight captures c7. And we're going to look at this for a little while. So first of all, if the king captures, what would happen then? We're going to just look at what Carlsen played first. He played rook to d8. But why can't he take? Why cannot Magnus Carlsen take the knight on c7? Well, the answer is, if he takes, then Caruana actually has this check from the bishop. And it's a really annoying check because you can't move your king down here. Obviously, it's a check. And if you go here, another check arises with rook captures d7. And white will gain so much initiative with having his rook on the 7th rank. If you bring your king to c6, then you can still take the bishop and threaten a mate here on c7. And if king goes to d8, you take with check, and after king moves, you pick up this pawn, and it's really hard to deal with that. Even taking on f7 first might be strong. But yeah, and the last move is king to c8, but that just leaves pawn captures d7 check, winning the rook for, and the bishop actually, for a knight. So that would be a huge blunder by Magnus Carlsen. And let's look at why the rook had to be on d1 for this tactic to work. Because the same thing can happen before the rook even moves d1, right? But actually, when the rook isn't on the d1 square, if Caruana had played that now, knight captures c7, king captures c7, and now e6 check from the bishop again. Now it is actually just a really strange looking position that is equal, because black can play this move and white has to take one of the pieces, right? After king takes back, pawn takes bishop, king takes pawn, and what are we left with here? 3 pawns on each side of the board, 1 rook each. This is just so drawish. This is too drawish. When there is such a pawn structure like this, when 3 pawns faces on the king side and on the queen side for each of the players, like this, or like this, then a rook endgame would just almost always be a draw. Of course, it all depends on activity and king placement, but it is very hard for either player to win this position. So that's why he couldn't play knight captures c7 if he wanted to go for something more than a draw. So Magnus Carlsen played king to c8 and Caruana took. Carlsen played rook to d8 and Caruana played his knight back to d5. Rook to e8, again hoping and wishing for Caruana to go back to c7 so that he could repeat Carlsen himself, that is, and so that they might agree to a draw, and also bringing defense onto this bishop. Bishop doesn't have any good squares where it's at right now, and giving this bishop the f8 square wouldn't be a good idea, because you really want that bishop to stay on this diagonal right here for now. Alright, bishop to e1, trying to just get your bishop some more activity on from the queen side. Bishop to d8, bishop c3 and g6. So Carlsen tries to actually or maybe even hopes to play something like f6, f5 or even h5 at some point, but actually this pawn move is really weakening for black. You're kind of giving away a really strong square to white, the f6 square. So just look at how cramped Magnus Carlsen really is at the moment. These bishops can't do anything other than sit tight and hope for the best, and this rook really doesn't do anything as well. So how should Magnus Carlsen continue? Well, he goes on in traditional Magnus Carlsen style, obviously. So after king to g3, he plays b5, giving away another pawn, but gets his bishop more activity. And if pawn takes here, bishop captures, obviously, and that happened. And suddenly Magnus Carlsen has much better piece activity. But then again, he is down 2 pawns right now. So rook to e6, f4, rook a6, just threatening this pawn basically, trying to ask white if he would like to overextend with a move such as a4. But white doesn't go for that, just simply rook to d2, defending everything. And now Magnus Carlsen tries to bring his game to the king side and tries to attack Caruana there instead. So g captures h5 and g captures h5, knight f5 and rook to g6 check. He switches his rook over to g6 and asks the white king, where do you want to move? Because there are some weird looking threats for black here as well onto the white king. So king h2 and bishop to c6, knight to d6 check, and this is actually a really strong move. After this check, Carlsen is actually in huge danger. This is actually a brilliant move by Fabiano Caruana there. You can only see why that is after the next couple of moves. So f5 and rook to g8 and f6, just creating another bishop that is kind of very bad. So Magnus Carlsen has to deal with that. But from this point on, or maybe a couple of moves earlier, I really think that they had some time trouble, because now we're at move 39. But Caruana kind of gives it away, his position, after bishop to b6. So here Caruana should have played knight captures f7. But instead he plays knight back to c4. And here again Carlsen plays a dubious move with rook to e8. A better move would be bishop back to c7, saying that if you want to go here now, I'm simply going to take that knight with my bishop. But Carlsen's first mistake in this sequence was this move, bishop b6. He should have gone for rook to f8, probably just holding on to this pawn so that these two pawns aren't that menacing, at least for now. But that's not what happened, as you saw. And after rook to e8, allowing Caruana to go back to d6. And that's exactly what he did. So now we're at move 41, and you can't really blame the time management anymore, because they have more time. If that was the case, obviously. And here Carlsen still doesn't like the fact that his rook on f8 will be so passive. So he plays rook to g8 instead, creating a really serious threat against this king, but it is easily parried by white, as you will see. It is almost actually lost for black at this point. So Caruana takes the pawn, and after c4, trying for a mate with bishop to g1 check, Caruana finds just another good move, simply h4, creating some space for his king on the h3 square. But Carlsen keeps up the pressure, tries to at least, with rook to g4 and now e6. These pawns are really, really powerful now. How is black ever going to stop those? So it's really difficult to see how that is going to happen. Maybe something like rook to f4 could have been good here, but it's really hard to see how that's ever gonna help, because this pawn is actually guarded by this bishop anyways. But black keeps on fighting with bishop to e3. But now Caruana finds a really, really strong move. Bishop e5 check. And the next couple of moves is actually really, really strong. And it's not only that you're trying to get your piece more active by placing it here with a check, getting it more active by force, but it's all about just another attack. Like, white is actually attacking black now, although it doesn't seem that way for sure because of this pawn right here. But as a matter of fact, after king a8, rook d8 check, king b7, here Caruana played the kind of weird looking move bishop g3, and now c3 from Carlsen, and rook b8. And rook b8 is actually not as strong as another move in the position, and that move is knight to d6. So if knight to d6, the king has to stay on one of these squares, right? So if it goes to a6 immediately, then we push, and if not, then we play rook to b8 check, king to a6, and now we're pushing. And if the king goes here, we're still going to push, and if c2 now, we can play f1 equals f8 equals queen. Even though black is also queening in this position, white actually has a mate in 2. Can you find that? I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Pause the video if you haven't done it already to look at the mate find the mate. Alright, so the first move is knight to b5, check. Where does this guy king go? Where can this king go? Alright, so let's look at this. It cannot go here because of the rook. It cannot go here because of the queen. It cannot go here because of this pawn. The only legal move is actually to d5. So again, where is the checkmate? Mate in 1. Okay, I guess you have all found that. Queen to f5. A really strong move. Caruana didn't see this though, so as I mentioned, he played rook to b8 check immediately instead of knight to d6. But this would have been such a nice ending to this game if this ever were to be played. But rook b8 check, this is also really strong, of course. King a6 and now rook to c8, skewering the bishop towards this pawn. So that even if black tries to play c2, rook captures here, c1 equals queen, the rook can actually take, and after the bishop captures back, then white can play e7. And how to stop that promotion after, let's say, rook here, and then knight to d6. It's really going to be a frustrating position, because not only is now white threatening to play e7, e8 equals queen, but also pushing f7 and f8 equals queen. So it's impossible to stop, so it doesn't help black to actually give away that bishop for the rook. So this is what happened, and white really just won another pawn there. So it's 3 pawns up for Caruana, and there's no clear winning chances for black here whatsoever. Even though he has these 2 bishops, these pawns is really hard for black to deal with. Rook to d3, trying to put pressure onto not only one of the bishops but both. And this rook really has to stay put, but also the rook and the bishops has to do a defensive job and try to get rid of one of those pawns, or hopefully both. So Magnus Carlsen played rook to e4, and now Caruana played, well, rook to d2. Just a simple waiting move, not getting into any rook e2 check possibilities for black. And now after rook captures e6, black has to give one of his pieces away anyways, but here after knight to g5, black simply resigned. But yeah, in this position right here, black doesn't have any threats onto the white king. That was his last hope whatsoever, rook e2 check, and that didn't happen. And Carlsen just simply resigned. But instead of knight to g5, obviously you can just take one of the bishops. Well, the first bishop at least. It doesn't matter, but it's like, even after something like rook captures here, rook captures on f6, let's say knight to e5, black is down a piece, but also black is down a pawn, and it will be so hard for black to deal with both of those things, and it's simply impossible to win versus a strong player like Caruana. Probably he would have won this endgame as black versus, let's say, me, Carlsen that is, but against such a strong opponent he just resigned instead. This game really shows how Caruana is really secure with his calculations, and how Magnus Carlsen sometimes goes to great lengths to get activity with his pieces and sacrifices pawn after pawn just to get that activity. And I really enjoy that. Both of those facts. Like, Caruana is he's just a machine when it comes to calculating, I believe. Magnus Carlsen probably is as well, but Caruana, I feel like, is really, really powerful when he has the better position and piece activity, as we saw in this game. Even though Magnus Carlsen fought hard to get more activity, he didn't actually get much out of it. Yeah, that's kind of it. Although I don't hope we will see too many Berlin defenses in the World Championship match that is going to take part the 9th of November. This game shows that even the great Berlin defense can be broken, and Caruana does that in a really, really well played game. This is a wonderful game played by both players, but Magnus Carlsen just got crushed. Just literally crushed in this game. And it's actually quite amazing how this happened. But okay, that's just it. This is game analysis number 3, where Caruana was white, playing the Berlin versus Carlsen as black, and Fabiano Caruana obviously won. And I do hope you guys enjoyed that for sure. I had a ton of fun analyzing this position, and this gives us some hope that Caruana will give Magnus Carlsen a really tough challenge and maybe even win the match. Who knows, right? I think that most people still has their hopes up for Magnus Carlsen though. Me? Well, I'm a Norwegian. What do you guys think? Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitch, check out my Discord, and other than that, I have to stop acting like a freaking robot.